Hello everyone, welcome to today's session at GNDR's briefing webinar on the Sendai Framework Mid-Term Review high-level meeting. I can see a few of you starting to join and coming into the webinar, which is great. We are just going to give everyone 2 minutes to settle in and to choose their language preference. So hopefully you can see on screen that this webinar will be hosted in 3 languages, so English, French and Spanish. Please do let us know in the chat box if you're having any trouble hearing the translation of the language that you've picked. You should be able to see a button for interpretation that will then drop down a selection list of original English, Spanish or French. Please remember also to click the mute original audio. It will help you hear a little bit better. And let us know if you're having any trouble and we will try to help you. So we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to join and then we'll kick off. Okay, brilliant. I think we can see the numbers rising quite nicely. I think we've got around 50 participants at least. So I think we're going to kick off. Aminata, please let me know if you can't hear me. Hopefully the audio is coming through nice and clearly and our translators can hear as well. So welcome everyone again. This is GNDR's briefing webinar on the Sendai Framework Mid-Term Review of the high-level meeting that's coming up in May. For those of you who might be newer to GNDR's membership, my name is Becky Murphy and I'm Head of Policy for GNDR, and I'm also co-chair of the UNDRR Stakeholder Engagement Mechanism. We've got a really exciting session for you today, trying to give you as much information as possible about the upcoming high-level meeting that will focus on the Sendai Framework Mid-Term Review process. I'm going to quickly run through our agenda with you before handing over to our new Executive Director to officially kick the session off. So we'll start with a welcome. We'll then have a bit of an overview of the aims for today. Hopefully it will match what you're hoping for. We're then very lucky to have Mark Gordon from UNDRR, who will be talking us through the midterm review findings and a bit of UNDRR perspective on the upcoming high-level meeting. A space for some question and answers from your side, a quick break. I will then give you a bit of an overview and a recap on how GNDR has been engaging with the midterm review process and will be engaging in the high-level meeting that's coming up. I'll then be handing over to Aminata, our focal point for membership engagement, who will help map which of you are joining in New York for the high-level meeting, who might be interested but cannot make it to New York, who might want to try and join virtually, and what additional policy messages you might like the GNDR Secretariat and the members who are going to take there for you. And then we'll have some next steps and closing remarks. So without taking any more space, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand over to Marcus to kick us off and give us some welcome remarks. Over to you, Marcus.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Becky. Quickly, I am Marcos Concepcion Raba. I'm the Executive Director of GNDR. I just wanted to to thank you all for being part of this webinar, spending a bit of time with us to understand better the midterm review of the Sendai framework and the job that GNDR is doing. In that sense, I just wanted to insist on how important it is for all of us to come together as a network to collaborate on disaster reduction policy. How relevant is civil society participation in the implementation of the and informing the Sendai framework. So probably, as you already know, this midterm review revealed that progress made at local level is limited. So to address this concern is so crucial to invest in local actions and involve the voices of local communities and their knowledge.
Les connaissances et
for GNDR, representing, trying to represent you, local communities, it is really a priority to keep engaged with the Sendai framework. That's why we are here. That's why we are spending so much time in preparing and engaging at the high-level meeting in May, as Becky will explain to you in a few moments. I just wanted to thank also all members that contributed so far on the reflection we made and the report we shared on the progress of the Sendai framework. It was published last year and of course shared with the UNDRR team. In that sense, I wanted also to thank Mark Gordon, Senior Coordinator of the midterm review of the framework from UNDRR, for joining us today and to update us on the process. And again, I don't want to take more time from you guys, so I just wanted to insist on how relevant is your participation. So please keep not just participate actively on this webinar, but on the whole process. Thank you, everyone, and over to you, Becky.
Thanks so much, Marcus. That's brilliant. And I can see lots of you introducing yourselves in the chat box, which is brilliant. So please keep doing that. And I promise the second half will be very interactive, so there'll be a chance to hear from you as well. So I'm just going to share my screen again and take you through a few of our kind of aims and objectives for today, just to give you a bit of an idea of what we're going to cover. We do have quite a lot of time. We've got a couple of hours together. I promise we'll give you a break halfway in the middle, of course. There's quite a lot of information to go through. So first of all, please be reassured that we will send this PowerPoint presentation and all of the links and resources to you afterwards. And we are recording this session as well. So for those who are joining live, but many of you will be joining the recording because you're outside of the time zone that this has been held in. So yes, you'll get everything sent to you through the community platform, but also through the email where you signed up to join this Zoom webinar as well. So our session aims today. The first is really to provide an overview of the findings of the Sendai Framework Mid-Term Review, to share details on the upcoming UNDRR high-level meeting on the Sendai Framework Mid-Term Review, which is happening in New York next month. I know some of you, many of you will be very much engaged and know lots about it, and others have requested as much information as possible because perhaps you've not been following as closely this next step, this next stage in the Sendai Framework Mid-Term Review. So we will do our best to cover as much as possible today. We'll give a quick recap on how GNDR has been engaging with the Sendai Mid-Term review process. Marcus just shared about a year ago, we published our civil society reflections and how that led us up to the global platform and beyond. So we'll recap that and we'll share a bit of an update of what we've been doing since and what we will be doing at the high-level meeting in a few weeks' time as well. I'll go on to share a bit of an overview of policy analysis from our civil society perspective on what's come out so far. So a bit of reflection on the current Sendai findings, a bit of reflection on where we think civil society has been heard and where we can see kind of positive influence going on, and share a few areas that we are hoping to take to the high-level meeting in May to try and get them on the table as well and a little bit more strongly worded going forward. We'll also share all the details on how to follow the meeting, whether you are going in person or wanting to remotely follow it. We'll be doing the usual daily updates and daily briefings through our community platform as well for those who can't be there. And we'll share next steps, how to get involved, and of course provide a space for some questions and answers from your side. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will hand over to Mark Gordon from UNDRR. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us, particularly at this incredibly busy time. It's really brilliant to have you here, and I know our members are very excited to hear directly from you. You're leading the process of the midterm review, so who better to have join us today for our webinar. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much indeed, Becky, and thank you also, Marcos. It's a pleasure to be here. Delighted to see so familiar friends, faces, and colleagues with whom I've had the privilege and pleasure to work with over many, many years. So let me get straight to it. I know we've got quite a lot to cover, and so assuming that some of you have a very deep familiarity with the midterm review process and some of its preliminary outcomes, but some of you may not, I've been asked to give you a bit of an overview. So for those of you who are familiar, forgive me if I touch on issues that you're already deeply familiar with, but hopefully this will stimulate a useful conversation as we look towards the high-level meeting of the General Assembly, which is but 3 weeks away. Ooh, yes, clock is ticking. Okay, so let me share screen and then I'll take you through some of the slides. Can you confirm that you can see the screen? Wonderful.
We can, yes.
Okay, super. So then, as many of you will be aware and indeed took part in the extensive consultations review and reporting back to the midterm review process, this has been arguably one of the most extensive consultation exercises of both state and non-state actors in the disaster risk reduction agenda for many, many years, and will be indeed the most significant moment of reflection before we reach 2030, and of course the completion of the period of Sendai Framework, and indeed the navigation post 2030 as to how do we fundamentally inculcate a culture of prevention and risk-informed decision-making, investment and behavior across all aspects of society through multiple geographies, sectors and scales. And I think we've been really, really encouraged by the depth, the breadth and the quality of the insights that have been offered back into the midterm review process. And that gave us an unenviable task of trying to capture all of this information from 140 plus separate submissions into the process into a single report, which you'll see as the main report of the midterm review has just been published in English on the 31st of March and is currently being translated into the 5 UN languages. So will be available in French, Spanish, Arabic, Russian as well. So the harder task perhaps was to try and capture it into the summary of the main findings and recommendations, which was only 8,500 words. I can tell you that was painful, but a fascinating journey through your perspectives and those of many, many others as to what were the key learnings to this point, at this inflection point in the implementation of the Sendai Framework, but also of the 2015 agreements, and indeed many other agreements, frameworks, and conventions. All of these are captured in the various reports. One was published by the General Assembly itself at the end of January, and English now in the main report, and as I mentioned, other languages to come. But there were some elements that we tried to ensure were reflected in the process of the midterm review, which I would imagine resonate well with GNDR membership. And that, of course, being the notion of that shift from managing disasters ex post to managing risks before the shock, i.e. understanding how, or a better application of how we understand our relationship with risk and addressing those problems before they are given a chance to manifest as a shock. But also equally this, as we have worked through this implementation period, how we are capturing the broadened scope of hazards and risks that the Sendai Framework represents, and as we learn to live with the reality of the COVID-19 pandemic and climate breakdown, amongst others, the systemic nature of risk. And clearly one of the elements that we were trying to encourage member states and non-state actors in reflecting upon lessons learned to date, or lessons identified to date, and how we needed to take course corrections moving forward, really engaging across all of society, evidently of extreme resonance for GNDR, but also of all state institutions, so that it is fundamentally a conversation that is not seen as a single responsibility, so that we can move towards this notion of integrated risk-informed decision-making and behavior. So some of the key sort of top-line messages that are coming out, we'll see that this notion of ceasing to treat disaster risk reduction as a sector. It is not a sector, it is a function, it is a part and parcel of good decision-making, of good planning, of good collaboration, of sound investment. It is an outcome. And that leans into how, therefore, should the risk governance be organized moving forward in a way that allows this to flourish, so that you see multiple authorities and entities taking responsibility for preventing and reducing disaster risk, away from this tendency and this traditional legacy construct of single entity responsibility, really moving into this notion that was played out so very visibly during the pandemic period of adaptive, vertically and horizontally integrated risk governance. And that this fundamentally needs to be underpinned by more robust legislative and regulatory frameworks. The other main elements of moving through that understanding of risk and into the governance piece, and then into how do we better invest, how do we better deploy finance and capital, recognizes that aspects of the financial system, of macroeconomic policy, and therein development and climate finance, in that they inadvertently contribute to the creation of disaster risk, fundamentally behooves us, impels us to redress how risk features and is treated in the financial system, so that it accurately prices, accounts for, and leads to the disclosure of disaster risk. And I'll come back to this in a little while. We can perhaps discuss that a little further. But equally and importantly, the notion of improving our understanding of risk and systemic risks in the systemic nature of risk requires us to not blindly rely upon simply a scientific interpretation of reality, but that the restoration of contextual information, of relation information, that is very often so much better represented by insights offered through local, traditional, and indigenous knowledge and wisdom, is so fundamentally and deeply important. And I hope very much that these are elements that will be represented in the intergovernmental negotiations that are currently ongoing between member states and New York in determining the language of the political declaration that will be adopted at the high-level meeting in New York next next month. So maybe I'll race through this slide rather quickly. It's the more sort of mercantile, more imperial representation of progress against the targets. If you're interested, I can certainly share more information offline, but this is all contained in the report. But you'll see that generally, in terms of mortality, it is improving, although I would state that this will need to be qualified in terms of this not necessarily capturing mortality as a result of the full gamut of the scope of hazards and risks that the Sendai Framework represents. And COVID-19 being obviously one very evident example of that. And that therefore it is something that we will need to consider moving to 2030 and beyond. But for targets B, C, and D, there was a reduction. That's definitely not an improvement. In terms of target E, around aspects of improved risk reduction strategies and plans at national and local levels. Yes, at the national level and marginally at the local level, but that, of course, a plan that does not make good risk governance a reality necessarily. So it's a step in the right direction, and it was the target that had a 2020 deadline. So encouraging to see the improvement, but still much more to be done in improving risk governance at large. Target F, disappointingly underreported, and this is something that we will be working with multiple donors and organizations to see how that can be better captured. And then in terms of target G, in the evident lack of early warning has been well highlighted, and I won't dwell on that because I'm sure many of you are involved in current ongoing discussions about how this will be addressed. But I would say that one thing that has not necessarily been as well captured is how is our access to risk information improvement. And that is an element that I think would be interesting for GNDR to explore in the period towards 2030, including around how do we measure the outcome and goal of the Sendai Framework, which remains a tricky thing to capture. So a number of challenges were brought forth by member states and by stakeholders throughout. The aspect of global systemic risks and the experiences we've had within the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis, highlighting the need for systemic approaches to manage the interdependencies and interactions between goals and targets of different agendas, not just treating this within the context of a framing of disaster risk reduction in Sendai. And this, how essential this is if the biggest transformations needed for achieving the 2030 agenda and other internationally agreed frameworks and agreements are to be realized. I've touched on this aspect of inadequate, often siloed risk governance and risk management, and I think it's been evident how the complexity of global catastrophic risk is overwhelming conventional governance systems. Systems that were designed to address incremental environmental and social changes and not complex interactions between drivers of risk and the irreversible impacts of breaching planetary boundaries. So current conventional crisis response and risk management just cannot cope with such interconnected disruptions. And we've seen this in multiple areas, from vulnerabilities in health, food or energy systems, or indeed in respect of rapid technological change and dual use applications. These are elements that have been coming through the midterm review, aspects around artificial intelligence and synthetic biology. These are things that we are needing to consider and are being debated between states in multiple domains and fundamentally form a part of the risk scope. And the negative effects of not treating those can be amplified by fast spread mechanisms of globalization and other. Aspects around risk-informed preventative financing, evidently this has been picked up by many as lacking, and that there is still a predominant emphasis on response versus prevention. A lack of policy and regulatory imperative and incentives for investment in risk reduction in private sector decision-making, and this notion of risk being consistently externalized in investments and finance that pitches into these notions of we fundamentally must address the challenge of short-termism, whether that is in how capital is shaped, whether that is in how finance is deployed, whether how policy is determined, or indeed the broader issues of broader consumption and political cycle. And of course, there are unique challenges for specific groups, and these are not restricted to LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS, nor those most at risk. And I would imagine that GNDR members are acutely aware where those vulnerabilities lie and how they will need to be receiving special attention. So moving into the recommendations, the review itself was structured around both a retrospective review and a prospective review that invited stakeholders, non-state actors, civil society, private sector, as well as member states to reflect upon what they had learned since 2015, and then through an exploration of shifts in context, whether planetary or whether specific to their local locality, and other emergent issues, allow them to lay out some of the areas identified as priorities for amplified and accelerated risk-informed decision-making and action to 2030 and beyond. And I'll go through these relatively quickly so that we can just finish up with a brief overview of the meeting itself. So this notion of shifting focus from hazards to better understanding vulnerability and exposure of communities' ecosystems, and I consistently talk to both aspects of people and nature, and I think this is fundamentally important. Yes, leave no one behind, but as I recall, one participant at a global platform a few years back said, leave no ecosystem behind, for it is these natural life support systems upon which we depend. This within the context of understanding risk and first priority, investing in data-related capacity and infrastructure, yes, to improve risk information and mapping, but ensure a sharing of risk information across sectors, domains, data systems, within and among government agencies, and to and from state actors. Investing in data sharing infrastructure, yes, and improving risk databases and risk mapping at the national level, integrating exposure and vulnerability data into decision support mechanisms. And this vulnerability aspect not necessarily being restricted just to social vulnerabilities or structural vulnerabilities, but equally, can we move into ecological vulnerabilities and their interface with human agency? So some member states call for centralized bodies with adequate budgets and the capacity to conduct consultations with various stakeholders, as well as improved accountabilities. Broadening the risk assessment beyond a single government entity, and this leans into the governance piece, but identifying and supporting specific government entities to act as clear focal points for risk data collection and analysis, and invest and support capacity development to improve and monitor subsequent uptake in decision making, which clearly is not something that we see on a regular basis in multiple domains. And then this use of emerging technologies, develop comprehensive risk assessments using such technologies and scenario planning to specify and assess complex risks. Then into the governance domain and around this notion of promoting multi-sectoral, multi-scale and multi-stakeholder mechanisms for risk management that are supported by legislative and regulatory frameworks that reflect those shared responsibilities for risk-informed decision-making and investment, and potentially enable us to target and integrate sectors and institutions responsible for driving risk creation and or its prevention and reduction. Then we have the promoting this adaptive risk governance at local, national, regional to global levels, including the participation of local traditional and indigenous communities, so that we ensure an adequate risk understanding in local governance and maintain dialogue between national, local, regional and global entities. Likewise, ensuring that local risk governance is supported with authority, and this is back to this notion of the enabling legal and regulatory frameworks with appropriate resources to be able to carry out their mandate. and developing institutional structures to engage the expertise of, yes, scientific, academic, private sector, but also civil society and local stakeholders. So this, of course, is extended well beyond into promoting the participation of women, children and youth, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, and older persons. And indeed, we're starting to see emerging calls for a gender action plan for the Sendai Framework, which we hope will survive in the political declaration. Lastly, then, around this notion of developing strategic foresight activities to identify trends, emerging issues, and transformative pathways for risk-informed decisions. This is starting to be these approaches that are emerging that it would appear, when applied at global, national, and local levels, can assist in exploring possible futures and interconnected risks, encourage long-term and broader system thinking, and guide sustainability transformations in the present. And that means that overall, we would need to see within the broader risk governance domain the shift in priorities to policy convergence to overcome some of these sectoral silos and develop new integrated approaches that take into account systemic interactions and focus on causal relationships between goals and policies. Then in the domain of finance, we have the first issue I touched upon around addressing short-termism and market failures within capital and finance. And these are failures that impede the efficient pricing and proper consideration of disaster risks. And the midterm review highlights the opportunity to make supporting disaster risk reduction a core duty of the global financial system, to prevent the creation of risk through risk-blind investing. But to take this opportunity, member states must address this short-termist notion of the markets. And this is something that has come through very strongly in the midterm review. It's currently being discussed in the context of the political declaration, first the Sendai Framework follow-up, but equally increasingly in multiple agendas, as we've seen, for example, in the Biodiversity Convention. Yeah, and so this implies that the financial sector must better account for and accurately price disaster risk and be more transparent on risk exposure, including aspects of disclosure, which, for those of you closely affiliated to some of the climate-related discussions, you will note that has been a discourse that has built momentum over the last 10 years or so that we start to incentivize investments in risk reduction resilience. And this may be that we integrate risk reduction into the mandates and decisions of central banks and other financial regulatory authorities. Furthermore, the international financial institutions, such as the IMF and the World Bank, could do a great deal more to further integrate risk reduction into their work. And this will then enable the private sector or incentivize the private sector and other mechanisms to scale up risk-informed investing. But there may be some use for particularly public investment actors and decision makers if we can better tag and track DRR-related expenditure to identify gaps in public spending and ensure that all public investment and procurement incorporates risk reduction considerations and disaster risk management practices into decision making. And so for the final priority, we have aspects of around, which was actually curiously one of the less strong areas reported back by governments, but we do have making the principles of resilience central to developing infrastructure systems, both in upgrading existing systems and integrating risk assessments and data into future projects, but equally around mobilizing resources, technology, and capacity to implement and extend the reach of multi-hazard early warning systems, and to bridge the divide between humanitarian development and peace-building activities, to seek to embed DRR within humanitarian activities so that interventions push beyond the time frame of immediate emergency response to build long-term resilience. And this work must demonstrate the value of risk reduction expertise for comprehensive risk management. Yes, potentially using vulnerability as a concept to support understanding. But as awareness grows, there will be opportunities for alignment of governance systems and integration of risk reduction to humanitarian action. And this applies equally to funding mechanisms. and a final appeal for the systematic inclusion of Build Back Better principles in disaster recovery plans at national and local levels. So, a brief summary of the conclusions: that yes, through concerted global effort, considerable progress has been made, but 8 years on, we are not where we need to be. A deep reminder that disaster risks are socially constructed. Risk-informed decision-making can reduce vulnerabilities, exposure, and inequality, and that this moment in time presents a critical inflection point, and the midterm review itself is a unique opportunity for states and non-state stakeholders to course correct so that we have a better chance of realizing the outcome goal of the Sendai Framework, but equally all 2015 agendas, frameworks, and conventions. So we're looking to really generate strong political commitment and action for the next 7 years. And this is partially the objective of the high-level meeting and the entire exercise itself, to move towards risk-informed decision-making, investment and behavior, and the health and well-being of humans and the ecosystems upon which we depend. And this is something that's being picked up over the last 7 or 8 years, including by a very highest level, with the Secretary General himself saying that anticipating, preventing and addressing risks to our planet must be part of every decision, policy, investment and budget, with a revitalized, comprehensive and overarching prevention front and center in all we do. So the midterm review of the Sendai Framework is not the only review in town, of course, and this is why we've been so pleased at the response we have received. We clearly need decisive action to prevent and reduce risk and build resilience. And these transformations the transformations required will only happen if all decision-making, investment and behavior is risk-informed. So this once in a 15-year opportunity to drive the recommendations of the midterm review into the outcomes and processes of, for example, the recently concluded UN Water Conference and the midterm review on the International Water Decade, the quadrennial review of the SDGs and the forthcoming SDG Summit that takes place in September, the high-level dialogue on financing for development, COP28 and the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, and of course the follow-up plans and acts to, for example, the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the Doha Programme of Action for LDCs, the Vienna Programme of Action, and the Samoa Pathway, as we move towards the Summit of the Future in New York in September 2024. But this will not happen without the concerted and sustained support from you, this is from civil society, from non-state stakeholders and member states. And we really encourage you to try and take these recommendations and help drive them into these other agenda, because that's really where we'll be able to secure impact. So maybe Marcos and Becky, if you indulge me a little while further, I'll just take you through a little bit of the high-level meeting, and I won't dwell on this because I think we can perhaps leave that for any discussion afterwards. But just for those of you who are not aware, it is convened by the President of the General Assembly, who is a gentleman called Shaba Korosi, incidentally one of the fathers or chaperones of the SDGs process back in 2014. And it'll take place on the 18th and 19th of May. It will feature an opening segment where the political declaration will be adopted, a plenary session, and interactive multi-stakeholder panels. You'll see all of the information on the website, and I'll put that in the chat for those of you who have not had a chance to look. And the UN General Assembly resolution that called for this meeting invites participation at the highest possible level. We have been encouraged to see a number of states that will attend at the highest possible level. So we will see heads of state and heads of government in addition to a significant number of ministerial representations. As for the high-level meeting itself, that is on the first day, the 18th, member state only. And on the second day, this is the multi-stakeholder day, which the PGA has been so keen to promote. And in note of the President of the General Assembly's insistence and welcome promotion of a multi-stakeholder discussion, the Risk Reduction Hub will take place on the margins of the official sessions organized by UNDR. And these events are for governments, for experts, stakeholders, including and beyond traditional disaster risk reduction actors. The intention here is to discuss how the calls to action contained in the midterm review outcomes, the reports, and indeed the political declaration can be taken forward, and to offer concrete solutions that can be the genesis of initiatives or coalitions, for example, emanating from the midterm review to drive this risk-informed decision-making, investment and behaviour across all agendas, conventions, frameworks, and processes. And the Risk Reduction Hub will begin on the day prior, on the 17th, and you will find all the concept notes and all the information on the website. In addition, the Risk Reduction Hub will be the Leaders' Roundtables, in part in response to the Secretary General, which called for ambitious coalitions that can be developed for showcasing at the SDG Summit in September. And these 10 Leaders' Roundtables will seek to maximize the presence of key figures from governments, from private sector, from civil society, international organizations, academia, and other stakeholders. And this will serve as a first opportunity for leaders to discuss next steps and a starting point for creating synergies with the upcoming reviews and processes in the rest of 2023 and 2024, including to identify game changers, accelerators, and solutions. So each table will be led by a member state co-lead, and this allows for high-level interaction in addition to the high-level meeting. So I think that I will end there, Marcos and Becky. I realize that this slide is probably illegible to most of you, so I will suggest you look at that in detail when we circulate the slide deck, but it gives you a sense of the overview of the 3 days so that you can see how the various risk reduction hub sessions, the invitation-only leaders roundtables, any other open or closed events that run in parallel to the high-level meeting, the formal official program of the high-level meeting take place. And of course, do not hesitate to consult the website, which is included here, or contact us via the midterm review generic email address, or indeed colleagues in New York. So I'll stop there and thank you all for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark, for all of that information. Really, really helpful, and sets us up very nicely for our discussion that we'll go into in the second half of this briefing. We really, really appreciate it. From our side, just wanted to share that we really can see civil society's reflections included here in these findings, and it's a real positive and clear indication of how our members have been involved, as well as the wider stakeholder engagement mechanism. So we're really thrilled to see this coming through. I think it's a big step for civil society and for the SEM. Although we are also very aware that we now need member states to commit to act on this. So that's what we'll be going into in the second half of our session, to think a bit more about that and get to the next step. We can see UNDR listening to us, we can see the partnership growing, and we can see civil society being heard. So now the next step of getting that member state commitment and action is key. If it's okay with you, Mark, we might have a couple of questions coming in, and I might take Chair's privilege to ask you the first question. From your perspective, going into this high-level meeting, what are your biggest hopes for the week? What would you like to see at the end of it? What are you really realistically, but also really hoping to see come out of it?
Well, Becky, it's dangerous to ask me what my hopes are, because then you might get Mark Gordon's hopes rather than necessarily the organisation. But I think that hopefully we're reasonably aligned. I mean, I think for me, if we had 3 major areas of recognition and commitment to fundamentally do things better, it would be around governance, risk governance. It would be around the aspect of how we deploy capital more effectively to the benefit of human ecosystems well-being rather than to its detriment, and how we are better able to facilitate and more intelligent in applying what we know in understanding our relationship with risk and the fundamental relationship between humans, the economy, and ecology and society. And that includes how we better represent not just a predominantly or exclusively scientific worldview, but one that represents local, traditional, and indigenous wisdom and insight, to be able to help us better restore context in every aspect of how we frame its use around understanding and managing risk, to designing solution pathways, etc. And that, were that to happen, we would have a better recognition of the relational information between multiple variables that are often ignored or not given sufficient credence. So yes, a shift in how risk governance is determined, so that it is not seen. We can finally move away from this legacy construct of crisis management and emergency response being the predominant, prevailing institutional architecture under which disaster risk reduction is housed, because that simply does not represent the reality that risk is created or prevented or propagated or mitigated across all sectors, domains, scales, and geographies. And that, therefore, the responsibility to address that lies with every sector, every department, every domain, every discipline of inquiry. And that is very hard to do, but it's something that fundamentally we no longer have the luxury to ignore. And that's a fervent hope. And then with regards to this aspect of finance and capital, yes, making sure that greater resources are available for disaster risk reduction programming and activity, but I would say consistent with this notion of a shared accountability and responsibility for risk reduction within decision making, that fundamentally the rules of finance are, we are able to be courageous enough to address that, to be able to no longer continue the fallacy of externalizing, ignoring risks because they are inconvenient and difficult to measure and perhaps more difficult to address, from how we invest, how we deploy capital, and the rules of the game that determine what is required to make sure that those risks are taken into account and disclosed more transparently. So I think that, as you can see, I have fairly lofty ambitions, and it is aspirational, but fundamentally deeply imperative for our survival as a species within this century that we take this on, and that this is taken on not just by the disaster risk reduction community, but by everyone, everywhere, in every domain, in every agenda.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Mark. Really interesting to hear. We'll be sure to find you at the end of the week to see if you think you've got your hopes come through. There are some questions coming through on the Q&A chat box. Just a reminder to everyone listening in, if you're with us live, if you have questions for now or throughout the whole of the webinar today, please do pop them in the Q&A box, which is found on the bottom tab of your Zoom, and you can just type in your questions and I will be logging all of them, so we'll make sure we answer them. Even if we don't have time today, I'll make sure that we get back to you afterwards on the questions that are coming in. We have time for maybe one or two that have come in, which is great. So one of them is really interesting. So Mark, a question for you on your reflections from UNDRR. Looking at Target E, and we've had a few questions on this, and looking at the number of countries that have now got national strategies and have done progress on that. Is there any data on local strategies? Is there anything coming in on the local level that you can see? And if not, what would you recommend doing going forward to get that type of information?
Well, I would say that perhaps the overarching caveat that I didn't mention at the beginning of my presentation is that the findings and recommendations are not UNDR findings and recommendations. These are the product of submissions of states and non-state actors. So I would not at this point, particularly as we move into the final negotiations around the political declaration, necessarily offer nor even claim the arrogance to have solutions to complex problems like this. I think the commentary around whether local strategies can be better measured would almost be obsolete if indeed risk was taken into account in a more systematic basis across multiple sectors and domains as part of good decision making at every scale. And that is not without its challenges, because it requires capacity and capability and resource to be able to understand the complex interactions between policy decisions or investment decisions that are taken at different scales, and what are the downstream consequences of those within context. I would imagine that some of the more concrete examples of where that has been addressed has been at the local level, where arguably some of the variables are easier to capture, at least within the sort of near-term time frame, even if we are encouraging people to try and look at beyond this short-termist notion of immediate return on investment, whether public or private. But the data on local strategies certainly has been weaker, and one would hope that being able to drive a more persuasive risk-based discourse into other agendas that have perhaps more extensive networks through subnational local governments and local authorities, that we would be able to capture that better by the time we get to 2030. Certainly, I would say the engagement with various organizations, but not least including UCLG and ICLE and other bodies, which by no means are comprehensively representative of the local level, nor even necessarily claim to be. But this is one area where I suspect GNDR has a huge important role to play.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. And yes, it's actually a topic that we'll go on to talk about in the second half of the webinar as well. And yes, all our members will be calling on you to support us to think about how to get that local level data and information. I've had lots and lots of questions coming in asking if you will receive the slides and the recordings and all the links. Yes, absolutely. We're recording the session, so just to answer the many questions I'm getting in on that, you'll absolutely receive the recording and all of the resources. I'm going to be sharing lots of different information points slightly later on in the session, so don't fear. We've probably got time for one more question, and if possible, if technology allows, I can see Graciela has asked a question in Spanish, and I'd love her to come on the floor and to ask in her own voice, which would be lovely. So Graciela is our global board member, our chair of the board. So Graciela, if you can, and if technology hopefully allows, I'd ask Aminata to invite you onto the floor, and then open the mic for you to be able to ask your question. Let's see if we can get this to work. Here we go. I can see Graciela joining. Over to you, Graciela.
Hello.
Hola, buen día. Buen día para
Hello, good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank you for this initiative. I consider it is fantastic. It's great to see Becky, Marcos, but I was listening to what Mark Gordon was telling us, and I would like to say that I completely agree with what we should do in order to solve these issues. Risk governance is one of the main actions that we should undertake as civil society organizations and as citizens. And I would like to wish you all the best for this meeting. And Marcos, I understand you will be there. We will be supporting you and we will be following up. Thank you, Becky, for the space.
Brilliant, thank you, Graciela. Very nice words to hear. I can see time is ticking. I think that's all we have time for this first half of the session. But I just wanted to say a massive thanks again to you, Mark, for joining us. I know you're very, very busy with just 3 weeks to go until this high-level meeting. So thank you. And we will be sure to touch base with you, hopefully in New York and afterwards to get your reflections again. To all of our members, I can see we've got more and more joining. We've got almost 100 of you live with us, which is brilliant. You can see that Aminata has been sharing a link for you all to fill out a Google form, which will really help us with the second half of our session. So hopefully you can see that. Let us know if you can't access the link, but if you could take 5 minutes to fill that in and let us know your thoughts, it will help us open up a bit of a discussion in the second half of this webinar. So brilliant. So we're going to move into the second half, but we're going to take 5 minutes to just have a break. It's quite a long session and I know it's quite difficult to stay focused and we want to get a bit more energy and participation in the second half. So I'm going to pop a holding slide up. We'll just take 5 minutes and we'll come back in 5 minutes time and I'll jump back on the screen when we're ready to go again, and we'll move more into some reflections on what GNDR has been doing to date and what opportunities there are going forward to get more involved. So yes, let's take a 5-minute break and then we will be back. Thanks all. Brilliant. I think we're going to kick off again. I hope you all managed to stretch your legs, get a glass of water or a coffee perhaps, so that we can move into this second half of our webinar. It's always very challenging to get the balance of those joining live and those listening. So hopefully okay following. Just let us know if you are having any challenges. The second half of our webinar, we're really going to look now at GNDR's work, what we've been doing together as a network, what we've been doing in the last 18 months, what we're hoping to do in the meeting that's coming up in a few weeks' time, the high-level meeting in New York, and to understand a little bit about what your organisations are doing and how we can come together again for one final push for this Sendai midterm review process and get our messages through. So I'm going to share my screen again. Aminata, do let me know if there's any problems seeing it. So I'm going to take us through a bit of a recap on GNDR's engagement with the Sendai midterm review and a bit of an update of particularly what's happened in the past 2 or 3 months since we've kind of touched base with many of you. And update you on how we will be getting engaged at the high-level meeting as a secretariat, but also some of our members who we know are joining, and to try and find out if you'll be there, what you'll be doing, if you'll be following online, and how we can really have one more push, as I said, for our advocacy messages going forward. So what have we done so far? So some of you are newer to GNDR, so I'm taking us all the way back to 2021. Some of you are very long-standing members and have been involved in this entire process, so forgive me as I catch everyone up to speed. So hopefully you remember that back in 2021, GNDR Secretariat facilitated a civil society consultation. So our fantastic regional leads coordinated with each of the regions, a number of surveys, a number of different opportunities for all of our members to feed in to your thoughts, share your thoughts on the progress or lack thereof progress on the Sendai framework, so we could really capture what our members were thinking and feeling. This was then developed into a global report, so our civil society consultation report, that was published about a year ago, as Marcus said, in 2022, in the lead up to the global platform. And that really pulled out the recurring reflections, so the reflections that we were seeing across the globe, across all of the different regions and countries that we are working in as a network. That was published on our website. I will be sharing the links again later on, so you can have access to those again and refresh those messages. Now, this report then formed the GNDR call to action policy messages. You hopefully remember that they were shared at the global platform for DRR last year, but they're a 2-year call to action. So they last from last year, 2022, all the way through this year in 2023, because they're really, really important messages to go all the way through this midterm review of the Sendai framework and really try and keep reminding not just the UN system, but also member states and governments on what civil society is recommending, what we're seeing, you know, the expertise that is there at the local level, what we really are demanding governments, member states, and wider stakeholders to focus on and prioritise in the second half of the Sendai framework. So I'll recap on what those call to action messages were in a second. But just to give you an overview of the process and kind of where that then went. So hopefully many of you remember the global platform last year. A lot of work went into that and many of you were there, which was brilliant. So the call to action and this consultation report directly fed in to the UNDRR midterm review, which is why it's so positive to see in Mark's presentation earlier on. Most of our messages, and we'll do a bit of a policy analysis shortly, but most of our messages coming through really clearly in the findings of that report, which is brilliant. So we obviously submitted the raw data, so the surveys that were coming in from across the regions were shared with the midterm review analysis team, along with the paper, so the global report. It was also shared very formally through declarations And these declarations are enabled through our participation in the stakeholder engagement mechanism, which is a really important mechanism to be involved in if you're not already, and I'll come to that shortly on how you can sign up if you're not already part of the UNDRR SEM. So that was between, I think, the end of 2021 and the global platform. So that was that period. Since then, the midterm review process really handed over to member states, to governments, to do their kind of self-reporting. So we were very lucky that we got civil society reflections and perspectives in first, and then it was over to member states to do their own self-assessment. That happened between the summer, so kind of August time, all the way through to November, and around December, GNDR were invited to join a core working group in the lead up for this high-level meeting. So we've been regularly meeting with our UNDRR colleagues as GNDR, but also representing the stakeholder engagement mechanism, so that wider stakeholder constituencies, as well as civil society, to keep advocating for those 8 key messages that I'm going to recap in a second, and to try and feed into the practicalities around this high-level meeting. So the agenda, the topics that are going to be talked about. We resubmitted those reflections. We produced a bit of analysis on whether we felt we were being heard, where we were being heard, where the gaps might be, and what we felt needed to be talked about at this high-level meeting, which was a really brilliant opportunity for us. We advocated very strongly for civil society space at the high-level meeting in May. I'm going to share in a little bit some information about how this particular meeting is different to a global platform or a regional platform, and how it's being run. And unfortunately, it is a space that is harder for civil society to be in. So we've been working hard to advocate to make sure that civil society still has that space in this high-level meeting in May. This included working with again, our regional leads to submit a speakers bank. So many of you were put forward as our strong members to speak and be invited to New York. It's been a back and forth advocacy process for this, along with wider stakeholders, not just GNDR members, but the 17 constituencies that make up the stakeholder engagement mechanism as well. This week, we finally had confirmation that we have 2 of our members selected to be sponsored to join the conversations in New York. It's a challenge because now the race is on for visas, but that's a big success for us. Even though 2 sounds very small, it's great to have our members there representing civil society themselves and not just the Secretariat, which is really brilliant. On top of that, we've been engaging with member states. So some of our key allies, some of our friends in the member state arena, such as Sweden, Switzerland, and the US, to share our messages. And I'll explain a little bit more about why, in particular, the government relationships are so important for this particular meeting, because it is very much focused on member states' discussions and decisions. So we need them in the room advocating for civil society as well. Going forward, GNDR is very much attending the high-level meeting in New York, both the Secretariat and a number of our members, which is brilliant. We'll keep advocating for our call to action messages, and we will be providing daily updates, as we usually do for these types of events, on those member states' discussions each day on the community platform and across our social media to keep you in the loop. And we're participating on a number of panels to keep sharing our call to action messages again and again and again, to really try and get it into member states' commitments. So a quick recap of the messages that you helped us develop for this time last year. This is very top line, and you'll remember that there's a lot of detail that goes under each of these 8, but hopefully you recognise them. So first and foremost, this real push to listen to the community, to really listen to the expertise at the local level, and that's already come out today. The question that highlighted, where's the data on local plans? How do we get that? How do we facilitate that? Which we'll talk a bit more about shortly. The second call to action message is to invest at the local level. we can see a lot of discussion around financing disaster risk reduction and how it needs to be rethought and repitched. And we have a huge call to make sure that there is real investment at the local level for disaster risk reduction. The third is around strengthening coordination and coherence for risk-informed development. And we really pushed for recognising the very specific role that civil society organisations have in leading that type of collaboration. Our fourth message was around tackling gender inequality as a key driver of risk. Linked to this, we also called for a transition from seeing inclusion, so inclusion of other underrepresented or marginalised groups such as disability or old people as a standalone topic, and make sure it is really being meaningfully mainstreamed into all of the decision-making processes around risk reduction. Sixth was the call from you to make sure that we are all learning from COVID-19. So not just including health and biological hazards in the Sendai Framework targets and commitments, but also learning from some of the failures that COVID-19 as a pandemic demonstrated to us and demonstrated to the global leaders as key failures of risk governance. So really learning and not forgetting what happened. The seventh is the need to strengthen DRR governance in conflict-affected states. And the eighth was a real call across the globe to involve youth in disaster risk reduction and meaningfully involve them, not involving them just in a tokenistic way. So that's a bit of a recap of the top line messages that we shared throughout the midterm review process, the call to action that we shared at the global platform last year. So hopefully I'm not going too fast for you, but trying to share as much information as possible so that you can catch up to speed. We've done a very quick analysis on what we feel has been heard, firstly, in the midterm review findings. So this is very much focused on the summary report that went out. So it hasn't captured the depth of the full report that's only just been released. But this looks at that summary report to see, have we been listened to? Has civil society been heard? Can we see the messages that we put forward at the global platform, but also you as members put forward with your organisations as well, and the various different groups such as the stakeholder engagement mechanism declarations. So here you can see on the screen that there are a number that we can see clearly included in that midterm review findings. And it's important to stress that there's two steps to this policy influencing. So the first is getting our messages included in this report, so included and, if you like, heard by GNDR, who were putting together and convening this reflective report and giving recommendations. The second step now, as we go into this high-level meeting, is to advocate for member states, so for governments, to commit to acting on these reflections and recommendations. So we're one step there, and going forward, we need to get to this next step to really get governments and member states acknowledging and committing action to prioritise our recommendations in the second half of the Sendai Framework rollout. So from our quick policy analysis, we do feel that listening to the community and empowering community level leadership has been heard. We can see an acknowledgement for the need to invest at the local level, as well as the need to empower women leaders and young people. We can see the importance of the all of society approach, which includes civil society, so that's brilliant. We do feel that the importance of addressing disaster displacement has been acknowledged in this report, along with the need for strengthened early warning systems for all. We can see the recognition of climate change as a risk driver, the recognition of needing to learn from COVID-19, the need to improve coordination and collaboration, and the importance of meaningful inclusion at all levels of risk governance. Now, on the other side, there were a few that we would like to see come through more strongly. So one of which was a specific mention of civil society's role. So we're very pleased that there's lots of content on the whole of society approach, which is where civil society comes in, but we're really hoping for a very specific role for civil society, because we know as a network, as a membership, we know how much capacity, expertise there is in the civil society sector. So we really want member states to acknowledge that and to understand how we can help them to improve that Sendai Framework implementation. The second was around our call to action on conflict. So one of the things that we felt maybe didn't come out as strongly in that summary report was the need to support conflict affected states to develop disaster risk governance. It's a huge challenge. It's not easy, but it's really important. How do we manage disaster risk governance in fragile and conflict affected states? Saying that, what is brilliant is that we do feel that UNDR have heard our concerns on these 2 points, and we can see these 2 specific areas being included in the agenda at the high-level meeting in a few weeks' time. So we're hoping by having panel discussions and having that on the agenda will really give the opportunity to unpack this a little bit more and hopefully bring it up in the prioritization of member states. This includes Marcus, our ED, being invited to speak on a panel specifically on conflict affected states. So it was one of the leaders roundtables that Mark had shared earlier, and we'll reshare the agenda of what's going on as well. So Marcus will be taking our messages forward and representing civil society in that space to make sure that that is brought up in priority. And similarly, we have a side event on the whole of society approach, again, where not just Marcus, but also a couple of our members will also be speaking on the role of civil society there, not just the importance of civil society having space and being included, but what we can bring, the technical expertise that you all have at the local level, how that can be brought in and how that can strengthen us going forward. So the next step is the political declaration, and apologies, some of you will be very familiar with this global policy space and others perhaps less so. So as I mentioned, getting those advocacy messages in the report that UNDR have released is one step. The next step is encouraging member states, so governments, to include that in their political declaration. So in a very kind of simplistic analysis, the aim of this high-level meeting that's happening in 3 weeks' time is to get member states of the UN, so the governments that we're all working with, to recommit to the Sendai Framework and to recommit to what should be focused on and prioritized in this second half of the Sendai Framework rollout. So what we really need to see impact and to really see civil society's voice not just being heard, but then being put into action is these key messages being committed to in a political declaration that will come out at the end of this high-level meeting. Now, member states have already been working to put together a draft 0, so they won't go in with nothing. They'll go in with a bit of a foundation of what they think they should be committing to. And then throughout the week, with all of the different discussions, panels, negotiations that happen, that will be refined and different messages might come in and priorities will be really committed to. We've been lucky enough to see the 0 draft that's come out, and that's again through being part of the stakeholder engagement mechanism. So I'd really encourage you, if you're working in this area and you really want to learn more and have access to all of this information, if you're not already, please do join the UNDR stakeholder engagement mechanism, and I will share at the end of these slides a link on how to do that if you're not already. So with this, again, in this very 0 draft, we can see a number of our messages coming through strongly, which is brilliant. So first of all, the importance of taking a whole of society approach, so beyond just government. This is where civil society comes in, which is very positive. The second is a commitment and an acknowledgement to the importance of local knowledge and expertise. So really focusing on and not just acknowledging, but harnessing local knowledge, harnessing the expertise that is at the local level. We can see that inclusion and active participation and leadership of communities, women, young people, people with disabilities and older people has definitely been included in that political declaration zero draft. And as Mark Gordon shared earlier, this includes a specific commitment on developing a gender action plan for the Sendai Framework going forward, which is very positive. So we're hoping that stays in that political declaration over the next few weeks. We can also see a commitment, at least acknowledgement, hopefully a commitment to increase support to the local level. And that's not just local communities, but local authorities too. So some real commitment to look at how not just local communities and local authorities are listened to and involved and engaged in participation, but how they're invested in, how they get funding, what finance is going to that local level, which is really, really crucial. We can also see an acknowledgement for the need for nature-based solutions, which many of you had shared at the global platform as well, which is very positive. And the importance of early warning for all. So really trying to tackle one of the findings that early warning systems are just not accessible for everyone. So it is being currently flagged and committed to in this zero draft political declaration that more investment and more effort needs to be put on making sure everyone, no matter where you're based, no matter who you are, has the access to early warnings. So that all sounds very positive, which is great, but there's still quite a bit of advocacy to be done. So going forward, as we gear up for the high-level meeting in New York, there are a few things that we really want to be pushing for, and a few things that we'll be taking into various meetings, negotiations, side events that we feel are really, really crucial, and we would love to see in that final draft of the political declaration. So we'd like to see more commitment made on how member states will invest at the local level. So practical commitments to how that will happen, how local expertise and leadership will be fostered, and how the whole of society approach will be meaningfully operationalized. So moving from acknowledging and really some commitments on how this will happen between now and 2030, we feel is crucial. We also are noting again that the current statement fails to include the importance of supporting conflict and fragile affected states for disaster risk reduction governance. There is acknowledgement of the need to bridge the humanitarian development divide, and there is commitment to support fragile affected states, but it's not strong enough, and we can't quite see that in the current declaration of the importance of figuring out how to do disaster risk governance in those particularly fragile countries and contexts. So lots of information for you. A few reflections on this high-level meeting, which I'll take you through. I promise we will have chance for questions and answers and more engagement shortly. But a few reflections on this upcoming meeting in May. So as you've heard today, in about 3 weeks' time, the UN General Assembly will convene a high-level meeting, specifically looking at the results of the Sendai Framework Mid-Term review in New York, and will be asking governments, member states, to recommit to the Sendai Framework and to put together a commitment, this declaration of what they will be prioritizing in the second half of the Sendai Framework rollout. So a few reflections from our side on this. It's quite a different event to a global platform or a regional platform, which I think it's important to just share the setup and what happens there and how we can actually engage and influence. So it's very member state led, and it is organized very differently to those global platforms and regional platforms. That means that there's less space for civil society, if I'm very honest, which is a challenge. It's hosted by, as Mark had shared earlier, by the UN General Assembly, and so the President of the General Assembly. So it's a layer above UNDRR. So an added layer of sign-off is needed when advocating for that civil society space. So whilst UNDRR is super supportive and is actively encouraging and supporting us as a key ally for civil society engagement, we still have a way to go to influence the higher UN system. So that's one of the reflections, that level above, we still need to be pushing to open space up for non-government, non-member state engagement. So that's one challenge that we've seen. It's much smaller than the global platforms or the regional platforms. It's very much focused on governments, and the priority is getting governments around the table to commit. Yeah, it's much harder to get space for civil society in the room. Again, the stakeholder engagement mechanism that I've mentioned has been a very positive entry point because it's quite a formal mechanism, a space where the UN system has dedicated and committed to non-state members to be involved. So again, if this is something that you are really keen to be involved in the now and in the future, I'd really encourage, and I'll share how to do this, to sign up to be part of the stakeholder engagement mechanism, because currently that seems to be the main way of getting civil society into the room in New York for these discussions. Where to find more information, just very quickly, I'll put all of these links in the chat box in a minute, so you can just click on them. We'll also absolutely share the slides and this recording afterwards. So if you would like to find out more information, firstly on the high level meeting, the first link takes you to UNDRR's webpage that gives you all the information from the logistics to everything that you would need to know about this upcoming meeting, including which sessions are being streamed live. So not all of them, but some of them will be online for you to follow if you're not going to be there in New York, which is great. The second link is the link to the full midterm report. So if you'd like to go away and have a look at that, that is there for you. It's currently in English, but as mentioned earlier, in the coming weeks before the high level meeting, all of the UN working languages will have a copy up there as well for you to read. So if you don't see the Spanish version or the French version or whatever you're looking for, they will come out before that high level meeting. So keep clicking on that link. And then finally, hopefully you've already all seen this, but again, that report from civil society, so our GNDR Civil Society Reflections report, is on our website. And if you just follow that link, you can find it, download it, and have a look at it again. And again, you should be able to find it in English, French, and Spanish there. So I'm going to pause for a second. I've been talking a lot, and I know that was a lot of information to digest. And I'm going to hand to Aminata in a second, because what we really want to do is hear from you all and try and understand how many of you might be in New York for the high level meeting, how many might be following remotely. If you're engaging with your governments, are there additional policy messages that you haven't heard today that you think actually between this time last year and today, there are new things that we need to talk about and we need to push forward on? We'd like to hear from you on that as well. And any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand Aminata, who's going to lead us through this next part. Over to you, Aminata.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, everyone. This is Aminata, Membership Engagement Officer at GNDR. So as Becky mentioned, so this short session, the purpose is to try to identify the members who will be in New York to participate in person to the high-level meeting, but also those who will be attending remotely. I have shared a link to a form so that you can provide your responses. Let me share it again. So please refer to this form and respond to the question and let us know whether you'll be there or you will participate remotely, but also if you are planning to engage with your government. To make it more interactive, I'm going to open the floor and let you in. So please feel free to raise your hand and share any thought, any question you may have on the Sendai Framework midterm review, or any question regarding the meeting itself. So please feel free to raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. Yeah, so over to you. So just to mention that the forum will remain open after the webinar. So take your time and provide your answers. So the purpose is to to know the members who will be there so that we can better organize ourselves and better organize GNDR participation and engagement at this event. So now let me scroll into the list and see if we have any hand raised. Yes, I think we have, yes, one hand raised. Nigusu Ligise, please, the floor is yours. And then we'll give the floor to Jethro Mache. Please, Negusu, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. This is Negusu Ligise from the Consortium of Christian Relief and Development Association based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with a consortium of a network of 470 NGOs, CSOs, FBOs, CBOs, and professional associations. I'm the executive director of that and also president of the Ethiopian Civil Society Organizations Council. I am actually new to this conference that's going on, but I've been following over the past couple of years. And I want to ask what is expected from this upcoming evaluation conference. And
Can you
hear me?
No, please. Can you repeat again? Your network is not stable.
Yes, thank you. What I'm asking is what is expected of this upcoming evaluation meeting? Is it for a decision, also to see what is the progress and what is left behind and where is and what is to be done next? Is that kind of evaluation? And also, how much are the Global South being included in this? The Global South, because in some of the participation that has been mentioned is only from the Global North, from myself, some of the countries. So is there really an inclusion from the Global South participants, especially from the civil society? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can try and answer that first, if that's okay. Thanks so much for the question. Yeah, really great to hear from you, and brilliant that you're representing such an important network as well. So I'll try and answer your question. So what's expected from the upcoming conference in May? So what is expected is that governments will recommit to the targets of the Sendai Framework. So it's a moment to come back as governments to recommit, and not just recommit to what was committed to in 2015 when the Sendai Framework was first developed, but to recommit to what the findings have shown in this midterm review process. So what is expected is at the end of the week, governments will have a joint declaration stating how they are going to commit to making sure we hit the targets of the Sendai Framework that we're currently not on track to do. So what are we going to do? What are they going to do differently? And what are they committing to? So it's very focused, this particular meeting, on governments. And that's why it's slightly different to the global platform or the regional platforms for DRR. So just sharing that first. Saying that, there's a very small space for civil society. So we've been pushing and advocating as GNDR to try and increase that. But it is very small because this particular meeting, as a high-level meeting usually is very much focused on government commitment. In terms of representation from the Global South versus the Global North, absolutely at the government level, it is. So all the member states that are part of the UN are invited in, and there will be a huge presence, but it's very much government representation from the Global South at the biggest level. And it's a much smaller conference or high-level meeting than than a global platform or a regional platform. Saying that, we have been pushing for civil society, particularly and specifically from the Global South to also be invited into those spaces. And we have made progress on that. And again, if this is something that you're really interested in, I'm about to put a link in the chat box, but there's something called the UNDRR Stakeholder Engagement Mechanism, and that's for all non-government stakeholders to get involved in meetings like this. So that's where, first of all, opportunities for civil society to be in those meetings go to. And at the moment, we have a couple of our members from the Global South, so one from the Africa region, one from the Asia region, who will be fully sponsored by the UN to be there and to speak on behalf of civil society. But we're still pushing for more because it is a very small representation. But I'll put that link in the chat box and you can sign up and share with your network as well how to get involved in that particular engagement mechanism as civil society too. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Vicky.
Aminata, back to you to pick another.
We have another participant who would like to speak. This is Jethro Mature. So please take the floor and ask your question. Yeah, you have the floor now.
Okay, I don't know if you hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Becky, for the presentation, and thank you, Aminata, for this. And I think it's we are arriving at a special moment for us as civil society to be part of this important meeting. And as Becky said, and I will add another thing: recommitment and realignment. We should try to have the recommitment of government, and us and our side as civil society. We need to try to realign all the system to the fact of what has been done and how we're going to do this. And as we have so much of facts as civil society at local level or regional level, so we can again share this. We can also take the lesson from the Yoga Framework for Action. So at the midterm review, it's really different from what we have living. Like for this part, we had for the Yoga Framework, we have so much of disasters, but for this framework, we have so much political problem or international problem, like COVID-19 and war and from countries, and beside we have the disasters. So I think we should share the government, the UN system, and all the international community that they should realign with what we need to do, and try to focus on the government, as I say, to have the recommitment to the Sendai Framework, because what have been passed, what we have been through as people with those years have pushed our views on what we need to do and what have been passed on our country. With like the economic situation has impacted so much of countries, and disasters has impacted so much on countries. Also, COVID-19, it's a fact, but also like the war, political issues, and those facts have put our vision on our work, on the work that we should do in turn, like at the local, international communities, and also to be able to see what we can do for sustainable development as we're gonna be like for 2030. So this is also my point of view, the recommitment and also to realignment, the realignment of our duties, our work, our preoccupation issues. So civil society and government, international community can focus on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, and completely echo, particularly looking at that conflict topic and how to really meaningfully include, supporting fragile and conflict affected states is something that we are hoping to push for. Aminata, I see a recurring question in the question box that I might just try and answer quickly, if that's okay. So lots of you are asking to share your thoughts again. So reflecting on the inputs that you gave us last year or over a year ago, how to convene, a bit of a reshare of anything new that you might want taken to New York on your behalf. So yes, absolutely. So obviously those 8 messages and the analysis that we've given today has already been submitted, is already being taken. We're championing these messages, and we're obviously focusing, if we look at our GNDR strategy that you all helped develop, on this push for localization, this push for risk-informed development, this push for collaboration and civil society involvement, and those 8 call to action messages that I shared. However, in that form that Aminata shared with you, that link, which we'll keep putting in, it is in English, French, and Spanish. Please fill that in, because in there we will capture if you're going to be there, if you're interested in this, if you're following online, but also there's a very specific question there asking if there's a particular topic or a particular issue or a particular policy message that you would like added and taken there on your behalf as well. So please do put that in, and we're going to be working really hard in the next few weeks to make sure that we capture not just the reflections that all of our members gave in the lead up to the global platform last year, but the new ones that are coming in after this as well. So please do that, and we'll keep that open, I believe, Aminata, until tomorrow. So if you want to take the evening and not just this session to fill that in, please do. Back to you, Aminata, to see if anyone else wants to come in.
Thanks, Vicky. We have another participant, Loy Rego, please, the floor is yours. Loy, your mic is muted. Yes, thanks.
I'm focusing on only 3 things. One is that we need to accelerate action on target E, both at the national, where there is a huge areas, as mentioned by Mark, and also at the local level. So that's target E as one focal point. I'm glad that early warning systems as well as tackling of infrastructure have become elements of target D and target G, and we should push for that as well. The third point I want to make is that linking with conflict is, I think, important. And even if it is not there in the final draft declaration by the states, because states tend to apportion these to subjects to different meetings. There can be not a GNDR statement at the main event, but a publication to indicate our support, and to take up a campaign, which is already there in our long-term plan, to link conflict and disasters where they coexist. So, and the last thing I want to mention is volunteer action or voluntary action. The beauty of the Sendai framework, and as I discovered later, also it was there in Rio, we have made voluntary commitments. Unfortunately, we are not talking about them anymore. There are smaller offices which are doing things. GNDR itself doesn't talk about it. So we need to bring back voluntary action, and we need to argue for it forcibly and forcefully. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Loy. That's really, really helpful. I've been noting those down, and absolutely accelerating really that local level, in particular on risk governance and action, the early warning systems. Conflict, absolutely, and we will have a statement. We will be on one of those high-level leaders roundtables. Marcus will be there specifically on the conflict one, so we will have a GNDR statement that shows solidarity and really does push for the linkage between conflict and disaster risk governance. And absolutely, we know that governments are very sensitive around putting that in their declarations, but that doesn't mean that we can't keep pushing and showing solidarity for that. And absolutely on the voluntary action and the voluntary commitments, trying to get that back on the table, trying to get that talked about again, and seeing how that links to those political declaration commitments as well. So that's really helpful. Thank you very much. Aminata, I think we've got a bit of time for someone else.
I can't see any other hands. Anyone else would like to share any thought or ask any questions? Yes, there is.
There's one question, Aminata, in the Q&A section that I can try and answer as we're looking at you inviting more people on. I can answer as you're doing that. So one anonymous attendee has asked, based on our perspective, what are the most important points that civil society should focus on in New York? So ideally, what we've presented here today, so we will share a bit of a one-pager before the meeting in New York. So whether you're joining in person or whether you're joining remotely or you have other means of feeding in, we will make sure that we share a bit of analysis around those key messages back with you again once we've seen the new messages come in, hopefully through this form that Aminata has shared, and brought them in and consolidated them. And we'll make sure that they are in not just English, but French and Spanish as well, because I can see some questions coming through about resources in different languages. So absolutely, and you'll have that before. You'll see that go out on the community platform, but also on our website and across our social media as well. So that's great. Aminata, back to you. Has anyone raised their hand?
Victor, Polly, you have the floor, please. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Good.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. You don't need to see me, right? Anyway, my name is Victor Foley, Chief Executive Officer of Disaster Resilience Network Ghana. Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. My question is what we did some time ago in Ghana on Disaster Risk Reduction Day. We did diplomatic advocacy whilst we presented a policy proposal to the government of Ghana through Interior Committee of Parliament for the implementation, the full implementation of the Sendai Framework on the Goal D. So I would like to know if there is possible collaboration with this advocacy that we have already begun, from GNDR, if it's possible, because mostly it involves a lot of resources and expertise and collaboration. So kindly would like to know if there's an opportunity for collaboration to push that advocacy through Parliament of Ghana. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victor. That's brilliant to hear. How your organisation and networks work at the national level. I say absolutely. So what we really hope for as a GNDR network is that as many of our members as possible are working with their national governments and sharing the key policy messages and trying to get commitments through that way, because we know that we need national governments supporting and committing to these as well. So how we've been doing that is twofold. So one, that's usually member-led. So at the country level, really pushing those messages and then sharing with us on the community platform. So the more information that you can share on the community platform, or I'm about to share myself and Aminata's email addresses as well, where you can share with us, maybe if you have a document that outlines what you have done with your government, just to keep sharing information and keep doing that, so that we can make sure that we are also including that at the global level. Because like you say, we need both. We need the collaboration. And then I'd also say, at these types of meetings, if you know that your government is going to be there, if you know the delegation, if you have kind of ways to connect with them, again, let us know. And one of the things that we really try and do at global conferences is help connect members to their governments. So help find out who is going to be there at the national government level, and connect to our civil society members. It's slightly more difficult for this particular event. As I mentioned, it's much smaller and it's much more focused on government. So we won't have the chance to send many of our members there, which we would usually do at a global platform. But that is definitely something that we're trying to do more and more of. So please do keep in touch. Please fill that form in that Aminata shared, and please drop us an email and share anything on the community platform as well, because it's really, really important to take that level approach too. Thanks so much, Victor. Aminata,
great. We have Adisu who would like to jump in and share some thought. Please, Adisu, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for this great event. Congratulations to you, Becky. No, I just want to emphasize on the importance of this session, because as we see, it's the second leg of the Sendai Framework itself. And if we talk about failure, though we've noticed a lot of progress, the failure, civil society also are partially responsible for this failure. And we need probably to come back stronger, to collaborate better with our government to make sure that we align the policies. And we all for sure have seen the last report of the IPCC that said that things are getting worse. So we are almost there with the 1.5. And in some areas, we're already at 2 degrees Celsius. And even yesterday, you know, in Nigeria, for example, the sea now is visiting the whole city. That's how I interpret it. So there are some serious events on the ground that civil society only have the capacity to really collect or register and raise at the highest level. And I think it's important for us as civil society organization to commit more on the Sendai Framework, because to be sincere, the Sendai Framework is like the orphan of these international frameworks. And it's important to really increase the commitment, also leverage the actions that raise the policy itself, but that align climate change and DRR on the ground. That's the only way we can show our decision makers this is the way to go. Otherwise, I believe that they have the goodwill to do, but they may not know how to proceed. And civil society can be can fuel the whole system at national level. So please, yes, you belong to GNDR, you are there as GNDR members, but probably GNDR may not be capable to fill all the gaps. And we want you on behalf of GNDR to fill the gaps on the ground, to raise exactly what is happening at the local level. And so, yeah, that's the call I want to share with you, and to really ask you to commit more for this second leg of Sendai Framework. Otherwise, the outcome of the Sendai Framework implementation is going to be worse than the Haibu Framework, which is the last international framework we had. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Adesi. A really good reminder. And yes, absolutely linking to some of those really important other areas of work that we're engaged in, like the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and linking, and the role that we have as civil society to hold governments to account, to link all of these different initiatives to make sure that risk reduction is included. Aminata, back to you. I think we've got time for one more, and then we'll go into the next session of next steps.
Kazi, please, the floor is yours. I think you are muted. Please, can you open your mic, Kazi? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Actually, I am Kazi Baby from Bangladesh, and I am the focal person of GNDR in Bangladesh. And we worked on Sendai Framework and views from the front line. And 4 years we worked in Bangladesh, and we got some points, we got some results of what the local level is doing for the collaboration work and work with government, local government, and the civil society organization. So as a civil society organization, can I ask you that is there any option or any possibility to work through partnership with UNDR for this Sendai Framework mid-term review? Is there any opportunity? My question. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Nice to hear from you. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by partnership. Maybe you could clarify. Do you mean feeding into the Sendai midterm review, because that process is happened with us with GNDR? Do you mean being at the high-level meeting in New York, or do you mean going forward? So the next steps after this midterm review?
No, after. But because it is only finished, so after.
Brilliant.
Yeah, because we are interested to work on it.
Absolutely, really great question. And yes, so hopefully, fingers crossed, absolutely. So just to share with you, we have been having meetings with UNDR, so including the head of UNDR, Mami Mizutori, this week, introducing our new ED, Marcus, to her and her team. And one of the things which is really exciting is that she would like her team to sit with us, with GNDR and with our members, to try and think of a practical plan going forward. So it'll take a little bit of time, because we need the political declaration and the commitments that are coming out from this meeting in May. And then there'll probably be a bit of a time between May and September, when the General Assembly is, when it's formalized and we really see what is going to be focused on, or what has been committed to being focused on in the second half of the Sendai Framework. So that's between now and 2030. So there'll be an opportunity there, and we'll be coming back to our members to look at that and to share various different opportunities to partner a bit more strongly. So yes, please, if you're already very involved as National Focal Point. So we'll be sharing that as that journey goes on, but we see a little opening coming, fingers crossed, for civil society and for our members to be a little bit more formally involved, which is brilliant, and we'll keep advocating for that as well. So great question and very timely. Thank you. Brilliant. Thanks, Aminata, for helping us facilitate that. I'm keeping an eye on time, and maybe now we can just jump to the next session of just next steps before we close, just so that we know how we can get involved going forward. Is that okay, Aminata, or are there any burning questions left or anything from your side?
I think we have one more hand raised. Maybe we could give him a minute. Yes. So Patrick, over to you. You have the floor.
Thank you so much for the presentation. The presentation was highly informative. I think for me, something that I just wanted to bring out of my chest was just the fact that we really need to think about this. The midterm review of the Sendai Framework has just shown us that there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think for me, from consortiums and join hands with so that we can mention Africa, for instance, trying their best already in Southern Africa. Hello, can you get me?
No, hello? Sorry, we can't hear you. Your network is not stable.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just wanted to stress. Yeah, I just wanted to stress that it's important for civil society or NGOs to actually start forming alliances in our own countries. A lot of us love working in silos. The midterm review of the Sendai Framework actually is showing that more has to be done. It's basically an emergency, and a lot of African governments are trying their best. For instance, we have the Cyclone Freddy in Southern Africa here. Malawi was one of the countries that was heavily affected. And we saw that the government of the Republic of Zambia actually reached out to even assist with $1 million US. As small as the amount have been, it went a long way in assisting our brothers and sisters in Malawi. So it shows you that even a lot of governments in development and etc.
Sorry, Patrick, we lost you again.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have to move on. Sorry, Patrick.
Yeah,
if you can,
sorry.
if you can, maybe if you can type in the chat box the final bit of that. But I think we got the gist of it, the importance of committing, the importance of members supporting at the national level, and the importance of civil society working to collaborate and work together, which is absolutely something that we will be taking into this meeting in New York and beyond, because it's essential, the role that civil society can play to really bring everyone together on this topic. So thank you. And thank you so much, everyone, for your questions, your comments, your interaction. Please, one last plea to fill in that form. Aminata, perhaps you could post it just one more time in the chat box so we can capture everyone's thoughts and see who might be there in person and who might be there following online, and if there's anything else you would like to be taken forward if you can't make it there. So please do that. Thank you, Aminata, as well, for helping to coordinate that membership engagement and Q&A. That was brilliant, so thank you. So moving forward, we just have a little bit left to go, I promise. It's been a long session, but I hope it's been a helpful one. So I'm just going to put a few more things up on the screen for you, and I've already put this in your chat box as well. Let me just get this up for you. So just sharing again, this is in the chat box. Either fill in that form, please do fill in that form that Aminata is sharing, or if later on and you missed the deadline and it's closed, you want to get in contact and you want to share with us any thoughts, or you have any more questions, please reach out to us. So you've got my email there, rebecca.murphy@gndr.org, and you've also got Aminata's there as well. Please feel free. We really want to hear from you. We really want to encourage you to share with us anything you feel might be missing, or understand if you're going to be there, or what we can do to support you if you will be there in New York. So whilst I'm here as well, so our next policy briefing in this series will be focused on the COP. So as Adesu has already jumped in and touched upon the importance of climate change as a risk driver, our next big webinar will be on the 11th of May, and it will focus on climate change and the COP negotiations. So please do keep an eye out on the community platform and our social media sites for more information. That will be coming soon to you for that one. But next steps for the high-level meeting. So just a few reflections from our side. So obviously, first and foremost, share your thoughts. Share either by emailing us or filling out that form. Please do. We really want to hear from you. Please look at those links that I've sent if you're interested. There's lots of information on UNDRR's website on how to register, how to listen to some of those sessions online if you can't be there in person. We will be working hard over the next 3 weeks to incorporate your messages, all the things that you've shared here today, but all the things that come in through that Google form or maybe come in through email. We'll be working hard to include them in the sessions that Marcus will be attending in New York, to make sure that they are very much represented, and we're representing all of you in that space. We know it's a huge privilege to have GNDR, a tiny space, but an important space there. So we really want to do our best to represent all of you as much as we possibly can. We will be sharing, as I said, a document, a bit of a policy overview of the key messages, as well as the key events that we're engaged in. So a bit like last year when we had our global platform, a bit of an agenda if you're going to be there or if you're going to be listening online, so you can see where we'll be and how to interact. So that will be coming in the coming weeks. And again, we'll make sure that's in all the languages so that you can have that. That will go out through our community platform. Hopefully you're all up and running on the community platform. I know some of you had some issues, so it will also be on our website and put across our social media sites. So if you're not already following GNDR on Facebook and on LinkedIn and Twitter, please do, because there'll be the extra information coming there. And then, as I mentioned before as well, during the high-level meeting, we will do the usual daily briefings. So if you're not able to be there, we will make sure that we are capturing a bit of an overview of what's happened each day and sharing that on the community platform as well, so you can follow what's going on. And of course, if you are going to be there in person, please let us know, because we'll make sure that we have in-person member briefings and a chance to touch base and support you whilst you're there as well. So please do reach out. And then, yes, the next focus will turn to COP. So yeah, lots to be working on. So massive thanks from my side for joining. It's been really wonderful to see so many of you online, and I hope it's been helpful. I know it's a lot of information and there's a lot of links that have been shared as well. As shared earlier, we will share the recording once it's ready. We will share that absolutely with you. We will also share the PowerPoint slides with you and all the links that we have shared. So that will come through. I think both Aminata will be helping by the email that you registered for this Zoom event, but also we will make sure that goes out to the community platform as well, so that everyone, even if you're listening to later on as a remote participant, not live, that you'll be able to access that as well. So keep an eye out for that. But if you need anything else, please do get in touch. You've got our email addresses. So without taking any more time, I will hand back to Marcus for a few closing remarks, and I'll stop sharing my screen. Over to you, Marcus.
Thank you. I just wanted to try to make a very quick recap of some of the points discussed very briefly. I think that it's been very clear from Mark's presentation that the midterm review recommendations include 4 main aspects in which GNDR has been very proactive. And I think trying to make it simple, 4 recommendations were about informing risk, strengthening governance of risk reduction, financing disaster risk reduction, and enhancing preparedness for effective response. In all of them, the voice and the participation of civil society should be crucial. And I think thanks to the job that many of our members and GNDR, Becky especially, I think that UNDR understood that, and it's pretty clear that in those recommendations, civil society is included. Having said that, our next challenge is to make sure that that space that so far is recognized has a clear translation to action. That means defining the role of civil society in the Sendai framework, and implementation of risk reduction strategies at every level, national level and local level. In that sense, I think that listening to you, to all of you, it is very clear for me that we need to keep dedicating efforts in participating actively at local level, advocating actively at local level. And yes, you have the commitment of GNDR to keep supporting you in that sense and to keep providing that support at a global level. We will thank you if you keep contributing to us to make sure that we can take the voice of local communities, local organizations to these kind of forums, as the meeting in a few weeks in New York. Again, I think it's been a great webinar, and thank you all for coming. After this, we will go to the HL meeting to make sure that we take these messages to try to demonstrate to member states the crucial role of civil society in implementing successfully the Sendai framework. I wanted to also thank you, Becky and Aminata, for preparing and hosting this webinar. It's been great, more than 100 people connected, and this is really amazing. And this is also part of the message that we are taking to the meeting, the high-level meeting. But again, thank you all of you for being part of this meeting, of this webinar. It's been great. Please keep supporting us, feeding us with all your ideas, contributions, and knowledge. Thank you all.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks.